Of all the movies I've ever covered this marathon, I genuinely think it's possible that Butterfly Kisses might be the most severely underrated, underappreciated, and unknown out of all of them. And that's just straight up sinful. We have talked a decent bit about found footage movies this Wholesome Halloween. We covered a very traditionally styled found footage movie with Creep, we looked at some of the evolutions with the mockumentary style of Leslie Vernon and Lake Mungo, and we looked at a screen life effort with our opening movie Host, which feels like a very modern world evolution of the genre. Funny enough, in my conversation with the film's co-writer Jed I did for that video, he even told me that a huge influence on his film's creation was that of the Blair Witch Project, which is a film that popularised the whole found footage format. Though not a filmmaking technique entirely exclusive to the horror genre, this is the genre within which found footage tends to flourish and has its richest history. There's something about the concept of footage that has been found and the inherent mystery behind its source and legitimacy. Whether that be a file found in a hidden folder on a computer, the contents of a dusty old VHS, or some documentary that never made it to air that inherently lends itself to horror. And with Cannibal Holocaust, the first found footage film to sit firmly in the horror genre, releasing all the way back in 1980, and Blair Witch dropping in 1999, creating a whole new wave of interest in the technique we're still feeling today, as evidenced from the slew of continually popular VHS movies, found footage and horror now have over 4 decades of history to pull from. With 40 plus years of evolution, the found footage genre has seen its fair shares of ups and downs, good films, bad films, and a lot of experimentation. It is a style that is constantly wrestling with its own limitations, developing in different ways to keep up with the times. Once, the technique was evocative of a kind of validity, realism, and credibility that caused audiences to question if what they were witnessing was real. But now, as a result of oversaturation, it has become harder and harder to convince a viewing public that this technique is not just a cheap crutch to rely on when you can't afford to make a real movie. Found footage has kind of formed this strange relationship with the public. Those in the know understand just how difficult it is to actually pull off an effective effort in this format, but those who don't will see something intentionally presented in a amateur aesthetic and think, well, anyone could do that. And for my money, no film better understands this relationship, evolution, and history than Butterfly Kisses, a 2018 found footage film written and directed by Erik Christopher Myers that acts as both an example of the genre as well as a tragic character study and a fantastically insightful and cleverly constructed meta-deconstruction of the format. There is a lot going on in this film, but for my money, absolutely all of it works. So the film is both a found footage movie as well as the kind of mockumentary that the genre often crosses into. Now bear with me with this explanation because there's like layers of meta to this thing, with this film sort of being actually 3 films stacked on top of one another. Beginning as a documentary presentation taking place in 2015, we follow a wedding videographer and film school dropout named Gavin York, who comes into possession of random tapes discovered in the basement of his wife's parents' new house, all labelled "Don't Watch." Now personally, if I found tapes labelled "Do Not Watch" hidden within the basement of a home I'd never previously had access to, I would simply mind my own business and not view what is, let's face it, almost definitely either homemade porn, a snuff film, or a curse that will doom you to a fate worse than death. I mean, what else could possibly be on there? You aren't going to get lucky and score a few free episodes of EastEnders and a Jackie Chan film on tapes that have been buried away and hidden with "Don't Watch" scribbled all over them, are you? But Gavin is not so sure, and is presumably really hoping to score a free copy of Rush Hour 2, only to discover the actual contents of the tapes are a different documentary than the one we are watching, a 2004 doc by film students who are investigating a local urban legend known as Peeping Tom. This is the second film contained within this narrative, but there's also kind of a third. You see, upon this discovery, Gavin gets a little bit obsessed with these videos, and thinking there's a chance to somehow turn this discovery into the legit film career he has always craved but fell short of, he begins to assemble a chronological cut of the film, finishing the work of the students that appears to have been abandoned. So convinced is he of the magnitude and importance of this act that it is revealed that it is in fact he, in an arguably very egotistical move, who has hired the documentary crew to film his discovery, work and research as he resumes the development of the student film and seeks to prove Peeping Tom's existence. The documentary that we are now watching. So just to recap, we have the abandoned student documentary as the first layer, which is literal found footage within the narrative of this film. Then, the guy who finds that footage is making a movie out of these abandoned scraps for the second layer. Then the third layer wraparound is the documentary that guy has commissioned to chronicle the story of him finding and finishing the first layer documentary. I told you there was a lot going on here. But although it sounds like it could get complicated and lost within its many interwoven threads, the smartly crafted narrative manages to give all three of these individual stories significant levels of development and interesting plotting without any of them stepping on each other's toes. Instead, each narrative helps elevate the other, giving new levels of depth to one another that wouldn't be present if each were shown in isolation. In essence, the inclusion of this seemingly strange structuring allows the film to pose an incredibly unique concept. The core premise of the film essentially boils down to, what if someone stumbled upon a found footage film in the real world, something like the Blair Witch Project or Paranormal Activity or Cannibal Holocaust, and truly believed it was real, and may even be correct in his assessment. But in a world where found footage movies have become a significant part of wider pop culture, absolutely no one believes his claims and thinks the whole thing is a gimmick, causing him to take more and more extreme measures to prove the legitimacy of his claims. It's a real rich tapestry that comments on the found footage technique as a whole and the growing audience skepticism in its approach, which also acts as a sort of meta-commentary on how the current film environment makes it extremely difficult to create this specific type of art, framed in the story of an artist constantly running into those barriers and struggles. And it does this while utilising the same techniques that found footage films tend to use to add legitimacy to the documentary portion of the film, doing things like utilising unknown actors, a naturalistic and unscripted presentation, and even incorporating real-world figures into its narrative to craft a sense of realism to the point that this fake documentary about a man finding a fake film that he thinks is a real film starts to feel a bit like a real film. It's kind of surreal how it all just sort of works. Like, in theory, the framing device of the documentary could legitimately be real, even if you completely dismiss the possibility of the student film ever being anything but fake. Because the documentary doesn't say for certain whether the student film is fake or not for most of its runtime, only that the subject of the documentary truly believes it to be real. And we know for a fact from just the history of this genre in general, that many people have been fooled in the past by its presentation. What's really astounding about Butterfly Kisses for me though is that it manages to be compelling even outside of its clever commentary, by being both a pretty good horror film and a damn good character study at the same time that it's a meta deconstruction of the genre it occupies. Within the narrative of the student film, we have a legitimately interesting found footage horror premise, filled with the kind of urban legend flavouring that once made the Blair Witch Project hit so hard. The two students in the section, a girl named Sophia and a boy named Feldman, are investigating the alleged phenomena that if you stare down a local creepy tunnel at midnight without blinking for 1 hour straight, you will summon a figure the locals call Peeping Tom, an enigmatic shadowy monster who will then stalk the person who summoned him by getting closer and closer every time they blink, Weeping Angels style, eventually getting so intensely close to the victim that they can feel his eyelashes on their skin, and after one final blink, he kills them. It's a tasty little slice of creepy local lore that really evokes that small town myth feeling. There's just enough little touches to it that make it feel like it could easily slot alongside the likes of the Jersey Devil, Bloody Mary or Slender Man in this kind of pseudo-unreality they all occupy, where of course you know they're not real, but you're probably not going to go say any creepy name in front of a mirror a few times. You know, just in case. There's the ritualistic element of the nature in which Peeping Tom is summoned, the framing of his existence around a specific creepy local abandoned location, the strange nature in which he takes victims. Just so many touches of spice and flavour that you got yourself a tasty little dish there. And it's one that's explored in clever ways that really roll into the whole found footage element of the film. Because of course, no one is going to be able to not blink for an hour while staring down a dark tunnel. But a camera can. So if you were to set up a camera for an hour to look down that tunnel, well, you might just see him at the end. And every time that camera runs out of battery, every time it turns off, well, that's kind of a blink, isn't it? Meaning he can come a little closer. This is the situation the two students find themselves in, slowly being stalked by a figure who lurks within their footage, feeling the stress of his oncoming presence and what that might mean for them when he gets a little too close. Linking the monster inherently to the camera makes for a really creative use of the found footage style to allow for scares and a creeping dread that really plays to the strengths of the nature in which it was filmed. It's an atmosphere that initially seems very separate to the documentary that frames it, but as the film evolves, those elements start to bleed out into the story of Gavin, in a way that really captures the themes and ideas of his narrative. When we're introduced to Gavin, he's an excitable and seemingly friendly enough guy, but as the documentary crew he hired to celebrate him starts to really do their job and begins to peel back the layers of this dude, we begin to paint a portrait of the man that is very different from our initial cheery introduction. Gavin is a deeply, deeply, deeply insecure figure to an almost profoundly sad and abrasive level. Here is a man who, beneath the facade of confidence, is internally torn up about never achieving his dreams. His desire to be a filmmaker falling flat when he couldn't make it through film school, and his job now as a wedding videographer a constant reminder of this failure. A job that in his eyes lets him almost be a filmmaker, but not really. Not quite. He might work with a camera, he might make videos, but he isn't making films. He isn't getting the recognition he desired, not in the way he wanted to. And for him, the discovery of these tapes represent a last-ditch effort. He knows, he's convinced there's something incredible here, and he could be the one to tell this story, if only people would just believe him. It's interesting, of course, that the story he's so proud of, so determined to tell, and that he sees as so key to his journey into the world of incredible success, of course, isn't his. There's nothing about these tapes that belong to him. He wasn't even really the one who found them. His in-laws did. But so desperate is he to be seen as a success in this world that it doesn't really matter if it comes off the back of his own efforts. He just needs a win. And it's a win he's so determined to acquire that even as his investigations develop into a series of dead ends, disbelief and money drains, he just keeps going, digging deeper and deeper into this obsession at the expense of his finances, his family, and his mental well-being. It's a descent that is at times genuinely heartbreaking and difficult to watch. Even if Gavin himself isn't the most warm of characters, it doesn't matter, because the whole thing is anchored in such a grounded depiction of relatable insecurity, of a man doubting his creative output has any value and so determined to not accept that possibility and prove everyone wrong, even though no one was ever really questioning his value to begin with besides him, that he's willing to lose everything in pursuit of this Pyrrhic victory. It's a film very closely tied with the idea of creative obsession and how that infectious quality spreads, often in toxic ways. All of the tragedy of this film roots back to this chase for creative satisfaction. At first, it's the students obsessed with uncovering Peeping Tom. Then, it's Gavin obsessed with bringing to light what they uncovered. And even by the end of the film, the documentary crew covering Gavin, cleverly led by the film's real director, Erik Christopher Myers himself, portraying a filmmaker within this world and sort of subtly suggesting that the movie as a whole could in fact be that character's presentation of this narrative, also becomes obsessed with what Gavin pursues, which presumably only leads to the continuation of this cycle of creative obsession after the credits roll. Butterfly Kisses is an astoundingly complex yet deeply accessible film. You come for the fun urban legend found footage horror, and then you end up staying for the metatextual deconstructions, the central themes, and the tragic character analysis. Analysis of a character so tragic, by the way, that in one scene, this film manages to even bring in Eduardo Sanchez, co-creator of the Blair Witch Project, in a cameo role, just so Sanchez, playing himself, can call into a show where Gavin is being featured on and humiliate him on public radio, calling his attempt at a movie and marketing of it the derivative work of a clear hack trying too hard to sell his narrative as real. Holy shit. Ouch. I just wanted to spotlight that scene to show you the kind of deep cutting stuff they managed to put this guy through and pull out of Gavin's narrative. I mean, imagine you were in the process of making a movie, and during the promotion of that movie, a filmmaker you deeply respect and the guy responsible for that genre's popularity personally calls in to tell you that he thinks you suck and your work is worthless. Oh, I mean, ow. This movie really hits you hard when it wants to, and always in clever ways that feed back into the meta deconstruction. Like, of course, Eduardo Sanchez of all people would be the first to question such a narrative, and also getting him in to play himself further gives credibility to the supposed truth of what we are seeing. Apparently, Erik just met him at a sound design panel in 2014 and kept in touch, and Eduardo, being a nice guy, was more than happy to assist a local upcoming filmmaker, so agreed to come on board, even helping him out by watching multiple cuts of the movie and giving him feedback on how he could cut it down. That's such a get for this film, and makes for such an incredible scene. I wish I could do that. Just hit up one of the most important filmmaking figures in the horror genre, someone who created a cultural zeitgeist that we're still feeling the effects of today, someone who created the seed from which blossomed the modern popularity of a subgenre that's been a medium of choice for a sea of established and rising talent, and just be like, hey, you want to be in my project? God, imagine that, man. Hey Ed, welcome to the channel. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Funny enough, I actually recently watched a great found footage film called Butterfly Kisses, and I think it's testament to how big your legacy is on this subgenre of horror, because you actually pop up in that one, don't you?
Yeah. Butterfly Kisses was, this local filmmaker, um, Erik Myers, and he unfortunately passed a few years ago, and was just a really interesting guy, like really super intelligent, and would write these. He's very much like a film historian. He would write these essays about. I remember he wrote some essays about Star Wars, all the Star Wars movies, and they were just, like they're still out there. Like they're just amazing essays about all aspects of the Star Wars universe. And he had made a couple of local movies, local films, and he was a talented guy. And he approached me about doing he had this idea for a found footage movie, and I was one of his neighbors or nearby, so we got in touch, and he, and I didn't agree to be executive producer on it, but because I thought if I'm an executive producer, then I can't be in it, because that was his original thing. It's like, well, I
Right.
want you to be in it and kind of play yourself. And I was like, that sounds cool. And all the stuff he was doing, I thought was really cool. I think again, I told him, like I tell everybody, I'm like, found footage is tough, man. There's a lot of people that love it, but I think more people hate it. And so you have to kind of overcome that natural, they don't make the best, the most, they, other than like a few successes, they routinely don't make any money, and
Mm.
so, and I kind of try to talk him out of it, but he was really adamant about it. And, I'm like, all right, so I helped him, as part of the film, calling into the radio station, and that was fun, and I think that, once the film was done, I gave him notes on the edit, and I was kind of an executive producer without taking the title.
Yeah.
Um, but it was, it's fun. And again, it's like, I didn't think it was going to be as good as it was.
Thank you so much, Eduardo, for being in this video. My full unedited conversation with him will actually not be going up onto Patreon today, and that's because this isn't the last video he'll be featuring in this month. As tomorrow, for our final ever episode of Wholesome Halloween, I'll be doing a video talking about the revolution and cultural significance of one Blair Witch Project. A video that will feature a conversation on these topics with none other than one of the creators himself. Hell of a way to say goodbye. Oh, I just got a little emotional there. Let's save that for tomorrow. So, yeah, that is the penultimate Wholesome Halloween episode all wrapped up. We're really coming to the end of this thing. Strange feeling. But we still have one final episode to go. So please, as always, subscribe to my Only Dans at the red button below, hit the bell so you don't miss it, and like and comment as sacrifice to the algorithm gods so we can make as much money as physically possible for our charity this month, Trans Lifeline. Again, I have no idea how that's going. This has all been recorded before a single episode is out, so I haven't been able to include our progress in the videos as we've gone along. But being that this is the 30th episode on the channel this month, I'm hoping we'll maybe be at possibly 500-ish at this point. If we're not, please help us get there with a donation at any of the donation buttons on this page. And if we are, even better. Please keep the ball rolling if you're able. Don't let a good thing slow down. And as always, I'll be supporting the charity myself with this month's Patreon money, ad revenue, and shirt sales profits all going to charity. So if you want to pick up one of these bad boys or subscribe to the Patreon, that gets exclusive access to, among other things, some of my interviews with filmmakers this month, as well as 4 exclusive Wholesome Halloween episodes, then you can find all that in the description. And once again, in non-Trans Lifeline charity news, if I am still in Face of Horror by this point, which I really, really doubt I am, but if I am, holy hell, please continue to vote for me at the link in the description, because this is like endgame territory and it could be life-changing for me if I won that thing. Secondly, as creative advisor on the next entry of the In Search of Darkness franchise on sale this month, you can find my affiliate link in the description where I am able to offer you a 10% discount on that film if a multi-hour long mega documentary on early 90s horror sounds like something you'd be into, and judging by the fact you're watching a skeleton on the internet talk about horror for 31 days straight, I'm guessing it might. And thirdly, and finally, can't go into this one too much, but I'm working on a horror gaming documentary project with some fairly significant figures, and it would be super helpful and appreciated if any of you guys would be interested in something like that, if you could fill out the survey in the description. Lots going on, it's a busy time to be a skeleton, but we've only got one more to go. So once again, I will say, for the very last time this month, I've been Dan Drambles, you're watching Wholesome Halloween 3, a celebration of horror, and I will see you again tomorrow.